Eli Carter was just 10 years old when he set out with his old German Shepherd Ranger through the frozen woods of Silver Creek. What began as an ordinary walk home before the blizzard turned into something that would change everything. Ranger's sudden barking tore through the silence, leading Eli off the trail, straight to a sight that froze his blood. Two police officers, half buried in the snow, bruised, bound, and left to die. Eli never imagined that this single act of courage would unravel a criminal empire, test the loyalty of his own family, and prove that even an aging dog still carried the heart of a hero. What happened next will make you believe in redemption, faith, and the quiet miracles God still sends to those who don't give up. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss these true stories of courage, faith, and second chances. The wind over Silver Creek sang like a ghost dragging chains through the trees. It was mid-afternoon, but the sky already wore the color of iron. Snow drifted sideways across the ridges, fine as powdered glass, hissing against the bare aspens. 10-year-old Eli Carter trudged along the narrow trail with his scarf pulled high and his mittened hand buried deep in the thick fur of the dog beside him. The dog's name was Ranger, a large, aging German shepherd with a sable coat dulled by frost and the kind of slow, deliberate gait that belonged to creatures who had once been fast. 8 years ago, Ranger had been a rescue legend, a canine who could find lost hikers in storms and drag men twice his weight out of ravines. Now he was grizzled, stiff in the hips, but his eyes, deep amber and alert, still burned with an old soldier's vigilance. Eli had grown up in the mountains and carried that look mountain children sometimes have. Cheeks wind-chapped pink, hair the color of old straw, eyes a pale green that mirrored the pine needles. He was small for his age, wiry, a bundle of energy wrapped in a blue down jacket that had once belonged to his older cousin. His father called him thin as a sapling, but twice as stubborn. Today, the boy's determination was all that kept his legs moving through snow that reached halfway up his shins. His father, Jack Carter, had sent him down from the ranger outpost before noon, warning that a storm was building fast. Jack was the head ranger of Silver Creek National Forest, a man built like the mountains he served, broad-shouldered, weathered, and steady. His face carried the sharp lines of someone who'd lived long in wind and sun, with stubble perpetually chasing his jaw, and eyes the color of worn wood. Once, long ago, Jack had been a wildfire rescuer in California, until the day a collapsing pine had pinned his partner to the ground. The partner didn't make it, and Jack carried that silence in him like a second heart ever since. He had taught Eli that the mountains could be beautiful and brutal in the same breath. Ranger stopped suddenly, head raised, ears pricked. A low growl rumbled from his chest, the kind that starts small but makes the air around it tighten. Eli froze. The forest ahead was nothing but white mist and the whisper of snow sliding off branches. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, his breath pluming into the cold. Then Ranger barked, once, loud, sharp, echoing off the cliffs, and bolted into the trees. "Ranger!" Eli shouted, stumbling after him, his boots sinking deep. Snow sprayed into his face as he pushed through the drifts, heart hammering. He slipped once, caught himself on a low branch, and kept going. The sound came before the sight, a muffled moan, almost swallowed by the wind. Eli stopped, chest heaving. The shape in the snow barely looked human at first. Two of them lay half buried in a shallow hollow beside a fallen log. Their uniforms were almost invisible beneath the crust of ice, their faces pale and bruised, mouths sealed with silver duct tape frosted with breath. For one terrible second, Eli thought they were dead. Then he saw it, the faintest wisp of air escaping from the nose of the man closest to him. The other, a woman, shuddered weakly as a flake landed on her lashes. Eli's mind raced. He dropped to his knees, the cold biting instantly through his snow pants. It's okay," he murmured, though his voice trembled. Ranger circled the bodies, barking in short, clipped bursts, pawing at the snow as if trying to dig them out himself. Eli tugged off his mittens, his fingers already burning. He unscrewed the thermos from his pack, his dad's cocoa still steaming faintly, and poured a trickle along the edge of the tape covering the man's mouth. The warmth softened the frozen adhesive just enough for Eli to peel it away carefully. The man's lips were split, his skin waxy and cold as porcelain. "Hey, can you hear me?" Eli whispered. There was no answer. He turned to the woman, repeated the motion, hands shaking so badly he almost spilled the cocoa. Her eyelashes fluttered, a fragile twitch of life, and her chest hitched shallowly. "Dad!" Eli grabbed his emergency radio, thumbed the button. Static hissed. "Dad, it's Eli. I'm at the South Ridge near mile marker 6. 2 people hurt bad. They're alive, but please hurry." The response cracked through the wind after a second that felt like forever. Jack's voice, tight, clipped, instantly alert. "Eli, don't move them. Wrap their heads, keep them warm. I'm coming now." Eli let out a shaky breath. Okay. He pulled the spare scarf from his pack, wrapping it gently around the man's head, then stripped off his parka and laid it over the woman's chest. His fingers felt like ice. Ranger pressed close, his heavy body shielding them from the wind, his breath coming in visible clouds. "Good boy," Eli whispered, touching the rough fur behind Ranger's ear. The dog's ears flicked, eyes flicking between the unconscious faces and the trees beyond. Somewhere deep in the forest, a branch snapped. Ranger's tail stiffened, another growl rising low. Eli's heart tripped in his chest. He glanced toward the noise but saw only drifting snow. His pulse thundered, the silence thick around him. He wanted to believe it was just the wind. But Ranger didn't growl at the wind. He huddled closer to the 2 strangers, whispering under his breath like a prayer. "Dad's coming. He always comes." The woman's hand twitched faintly in the snow, fingers curling toward him before going still again. Far off down the mountain, faint but growing, came the rising howl of sirens. Relief struck through Eli like sunlight in fog. Ranger's ears turned toward the sound. He barked once, sharp and sure. The noise came closer, louder, the whine of engines, the crunch of tires on ice. Snow sprayed up, as headlights cut through the gray. Then shapes emerged, 3 snowmobiles cresting the ridge, red flares glinting off their windshields. Eli sagged back, chest heaving, tears stinging behind his eyes without quite falling. Jack Carter was off the lead sled before it stopped moving. His parka was dusted white, his jaw dark with 2 days' stubble, his hazel eyes burning with fear and focus. "Eli!" he shouted. The boy turned, mouth opening, but no sound came. Jack was already there, kneeling beside him, hands moving fast and sure. "You did good," he muttered, checking the officer's pulses, calling orders to the team behind him. "You did real good." The rescue team moved like a single body. A medic, a burly man with a graying beard named Jonas, peeled back the woman's eyelids, muttering, "Weak pulse, but there." Another ranger, a tall blonde woman with a braid frozen stiff with snow, tore open heat packs and layered them across the man's ribs. Eli just knelt there, staring, his breath fogging the air, his thoughts a whirl of noise and disbelief. He didn't even realize he was crying until Ranger pressed his muzzle against the boy's shoulder, warm and solid and real. Jack's hand came down on Eli's back. "Let's get them out," he said, voice rough. The storm above was thickening now, a curtain of white swallowing the trees. As they loaded the injured officers onto the rescue sleds, the forest moaned around them, the wind picking up a strange, hollow rhythm like something moving beneath the snow. Eli glanced toward the tree line one last time. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw movement, a dark shape slipping between the pines too fast to name. Then it was gone, lost in the storm. He opened his mouth to call out, but Jack's voice cut through the wind. "Come on, son!" Eli hesitated, the image still burning in his mind. Then he turned, climbed into the sled beside Ranger, and watched as the forest swallowed itself behind them. He didn't know yet that the shadow he'd glimpsed was the beginning of everything, the secret buried deeper than the snow, waiting to be unearthed. The storm rolled over Silver Creek like an ancient beast waking from its sleep. Snow hammered the Ranger outpost roof, and the world beyond the windows was nothing but white noise and shifting ghosts. Inside, the warmth smelled of pine smoke, antiseptic, and damp wool. Eli Carter sat near the wood stove, his knees tucked under his chin, Ranger's head heavy in his lap. The old German shepherd's fur was still wet from the rescue, his breath slow and even, but his ears twitched at every sound like twin antennae scanning for danger. The two injured officers lay on cots nearby, their faces pale against the flickering lamplight. One was a man in his 30s, lean, sharp-jawed, his short dark hair matted with ice and blood. His name tag read, D. Pike. Even unconscious, he had the kind of face that seemed carved for command, proud, stubborn, carrying an invisible burden. The woman beside him was smaller, with auburn hair clumped with frost and freckles scattered faintly across her gray skin. Her badge glinted faintly under a blanket. M. Ellison. Jack Carter moved between them, his big frame blocking the firelight. His flannel shirt was half unbuttoned, sleeves rolled up, revealing the scar down his left forearm. A white rope of skin that told of fire, not frost. His eyes were steady, but hollowed at the edges. He'd seen too many bodies dragged from storms, and every heartbeat waiting for these two to breathe felt like watching a coin spin between life and death. "Jonas, check her pulse again," Jack ordered. Jonas Red, the team medic, leaned over Mara Ellison's cot. He was a broad man in his 40s, beard streaked silver, the kind of quiet soul who moved with gentleness in places where the world demanded brutality. He pressed two thick fingers against her wrist. "Weak, but there," he muttered. "They'll need fluids and heat soon. Hypothermia this deep can trick you. Makes you think they're dead before they're done fighting." His voice was soft, oddly soothing, like the tone of a man who had spoken to dying people and learned to make peace with the waiting. Ivy Clark, the youngest ranger in Jack's crew, adjusted the IV lines with steady hands. She was tall and slim, with sharp cheekbones and a long blonde braid that now hung stiff with ice. Her blue eyes held the restless focus of someone who had once competed against time and lost something to it. Before joining the Ranger service, she'd been a professional skier until a fall shattered her knee. She never talked about it, but her movements were measured now, deliberate, as though the mountain still demanded repayment. Eli watched in silence, trying to make himself small. Every creak of the building sounded too loud. He didn't know whether to feel proud or terrified about what he'd done. His fingers brushed Ranger's fur for reassurance. The dog shifted, resting his head across Eli's boots, eyes half closed but still alert. Mara Ellison stirred first. Her lashes fluttered, and her cracked lips parted on a rasp of air. Ivy leaned closer. "Easy," she said. "You're safe." Mara blinked slowly, her gaze struggling to focus. "Where?" Her voice broke into a cough. Jack was beside her in an instant, setting a steady hand on her shoulder. "Silver Creek Ranger Outpost," he said. "You were buried under the ridge. You're lucky my boy found you." Mara's brow furrowed weakly. Her eyes slid toward Eli, who froze. "A kid and a dog," she murmured, as if the words themselves were unbelievable. "You shouldn't have been out there." Eli swallowed hard, not knowing what to say. Jack answered for him, his voice gentle but firm. He did what needed doing. Daniel Pike woke minutes later, jerking upright as if escaping a nightmare. His breathing came in ragged gasps, and his hand flew instinctively toward his belt before realizing he was unarmed. Jack steadied him with both hands. "Easy, you're among friends." Daniel's gray eyes darted around the cabin, sharp and assessing even through the fog of pain. "Where's Ellison?" "Here," Mara croaked softly from the next cot. Their eyes met across the narrow space, a flicker of recognition that was part relief, part guilt. Jack crouched beside him. "You're safe for now. I'm Jack Carter, head ranger. You want to tell me what you two were doing up there before my boy found you frozen in the snow?" Daniel hesitated, his gaze sliding toward Mara. Her lips tightened. After a long silence, Daniel exhaled. "We were tracking a convoy, lumber trucks. Manifest said they were carrying pine from Canada, but the routes didn't match any legal registry. We followed them as far as the ridge before someone cut us off." His jaw flexed, a muscle ticking. "They shot at us. I took a round in the shoulder. We went off the trail. Next thing I knew, we were being buried alive. Jack's expression darkened. Who's they? Don't know, Daniel said bitterly. Masks, rifles. But the trucks had one name on the side. Mercer Logistics. The words fell into the air like stones breaking ice. Jack stood slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. Grant Mercer? He asked, half to himself. He knew the name. Everyone in Colorado timber country did. Mercer was a man who'd built an empire out of forest contracts and quiet corruption, rumored to own more than he could count. Jack had met him once, years ago, when Mercer's company sponsored a wildfire charity. The man had smiled too easily, a predator wearing kindness like a tailored suit. He turned toward the radio desk, hesitating only a second before pressing the transmitter. Base Command, this is Carter at Silver Creek. I need confirmation on Mercer Logistics transport routes along the northern border, and patch me through to Luke Carter at Carter Timber. Static hissed. Then a voice crackled back. Copy that, Ranger Carter. Stand by. Eli lifted his head at the name. His uncle Luke had always been something of a mystery. The older brother who left the ranger life for the lumber trade, who came home at Christmas smelling of whiskey and sawdust. Luke was taller than Jack, broader through the chest, with the same hazel eyes but a colder edge to them, as though the years had carved out whatever softness he'd had. The two brothers hadn't spoken much since the fire that killed Jack's partner. Luke had called it fate. Jack had called it negligence. The radio clicked alive again, this time with Luke's voice, low and sandpaper rough. Jack, didn't expect to hear from you. 2 federal officers just about froze to death chasing trucks carrying your logs, Jack said without preamble. Mercer's name's on them. You know anything about that? There was a pause, long enough for Jack to feel the temperature in the room drop another degree. Stay out of it, Luke said finally. It's not your fight. If it's happening in my forest, it is, Jack snapped. You think you can clean the world by shouting at it? Luke's tone was cold. The man's got friends in high places. Walk away. The line went dead. Jack stared at the radio for a long time, his jaw tightening until it ached. Eli watched him, heart pounding. He'd never seen his father look afraid before, but this was something close. Jack exhaled, low and bitter. We're not walking away. Outside, the storm screamed harder against the shutters. Snow thudded from the roof, and the windows rattled in their frames. Ranger lifted his head, ears pricking again. Jack noticed. What is it, boy? The dog growled low, staring toward the door as though something moved just beyond the light. For a moment, no one breathed. Then a knock came, slow, deliberate, 3 hard raps that echoed through the cabin. The night returned with claws. Snow slammed sideways against the ranger outpost, each gust a fist of ice pounding the timber walls. The lamps flickered, their glow trembling over faces drawn and tired. Eli sat curled on a cot near the stove, Ranger pressed close to his legs. The old German shepherd's ears twitched constantly, nostrils flaring with the alertness of a creature that still remembered war. His fur steamed faintly from the heat. His eyes, those deep, knowing amber eyes, never leaving the door. The others were quiet. Jonas slept upright in a chair, his beard catching stray flakes from the open window frame. Ivy Clark stood guard near the door, rifle slung, her hair damp from melted frost, lips a thin line of patience worn thin. Across the room, Daniel Pike and Mara Ellison lay on the cots, bandages clean but pale with exhaustion. They had talked briefly after dusk, enough to fill in the blanks. Pike had spent a decade in federal investigation, the kind of man whose sense of duty had cost him more than once. A gunfight years ago had left his partner dead, and his faith in the system cracked like old glass. Mara, in contrast, carried a quiet resolve, her loyalty the kind that didn't need to be announced. She had grown up in foster homes, learned to survive by reading people, and now read danger like weather, instinctively. Outside, the wind screamed down the slope, rattling shutters and whistling through the chimney. Eli dozed in fits, the sounds mixing with dreams of dark forests and falling snow. Then Ranger's body went rigid. A low growl vibrated through the room like thunder behind walls. Eli's eyes flew open. The dog's hackles stood, his head turned toward the door, ears stiff, teeth bared in a soundless warning. Jack Carter, who had been checking the radio for signal, froze. His instincts sharpened in an instant. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, but he already knew. Ranger didn't growl without reason. Jack grabbed his coat and rifle, signaling Ivy. "Stay with the kid," he ordered. The young ranger nodded, positioning herself between Eli and the window. The door creaked as Jack stepped into the storm. The wind clawed at his face, slicing through the thin warmth of his jacket. He moved through knee-deep snow, his flashlight cutting a pale tunnel through the darkness. "Come on, Ranger," he muttered. The dog bounded ahead, his dark shape vanishing and reappearing through the flurries. Something was out there, movement too deliberate for wind. They followed faint impressions half-filled by drifting snow. Boot prints. Fresh. Jack's breath turned white in the beam. Then, blood. A dark smear across the snow, half-buried, leading downhill toward the old lumber yard. The yard crouched in the valley like an abandoned beast. Half its fence had collapsed. The corrugated sheds stood hunched under ice. The beam of Jack's flashlight swept over scattered crates, splintered pallets, the skeleton of a truck, rusted into the ground. Inside one shed, a map was pinned to the wall, edges fluttering in the draft. Jack stepped closer, heart thudding. Red lines stretched across state borders, snaking from Colorado to British Columbia. Beside them were manifests, handwritten, coded. Shipments labeled as Pine and Cedar, others left blank except for faint initials, ML and GM. He turned a page, saw figures, bank transfers, company seals, Mercer Logistics. Jack took photos with his phone, though the cold made his fingers numb. Every click felt louder than it should. Ranger circled the room, sniffing, uneasy. Something metallic clinked near the corner. Jack swung the light. A broken handcuff, dried blood crusted around it. He felt a chill crawl up his spine that had nothing to do with weather. He knew what this was now, not just smuggling. People had been silenced here. He pocketed one of the manifests, then turned for the door. From the distance came a faint hum, a vehicle engine muffled by snow. He killed the light instantly, crouched behind a stack of lumber. Through the slits between boards, two headlights crawled down the trail. A black SUV stopped outside the yard. The driver's door opened and a tall figure stepped out, his coat flapping like wings in the wind. The man's face was hard to see beneath a fur collar, but his stance radiated authority and cold calculation. Grant Mercer was in his 50s, his dark hair slicked back, skin weathered but taut, the kind of face that looked carved rather than aged. His voice, when he spoke into his phone, carried easily across the snow, smooth, deliberate, and venomous. "They're alive?" Pause. Then finish it. The boy, the dog, all of them. No witnesses. He hung up, exhaled smoke, and climbed back into the SUV. The taillights vanished into the white. Jack stayed crouched until the sound faded. His pulse drummed in his ears. Ranger whined softly, pressing against his leg. "Yeah," Jack whispered. "I heard it too." He rose, scanning the empty yard one last time before heading back up the ridge. The storm swallowed their tracks almost as fast as they made them. By the time they reached the outpost again, Eli was waiting by the window, wide-eyed. Ivy had her rifle ready. "What did you find?" she asked. Jack closed the door behind him, brushing snow from his shoulders. His voice was low, steady, but the weight in it was unmistakable. Proof and trouble. Outside, beyond the walls of the outpost, the wind howled louder, carrying with it the faint, distant echo of engines crawling through the night toward them. The morning after the storm was cruelly bright, sunlight cutting through the world of white as if nothing terrible had ever happened. But the silence that hung over Silver Creek was heavy, thick with the weight of things left undone. Jack Carter led the small convoy of snowmobiles down the frozen trail, the hum of engines echoing through the valley. Eli sat behind him, clutching Ranger's harness, the dog's fur whipping in the wind. Behind them rode Daniel Pike and Mara Ellison, both pale but determined, wrapped in thick parkas borrowed from the Ranger supply. Pike's left arm was still stiff from the bullet wound, but his jaw was set with a soldier's stubbornness. Mara's slinged arm rested against her chest, freckles sharp against skin that hadn't yet regained its color. They were hurt, yes, but not broken. They reached the old lumberyard just before noon. The air smelled of cold sap and oil, the kind that never fades no matter how long the machinery sleeps. The sheds loomed like dark teeth under the snow. Ranger jumped off the sled first, nose low to the ground, tail stiff, leading the way through the drifts. Jack followed, rifle in hand, every step sinking with a muffled crunch. Eli trailed close behind, heart pounding. He didn't know whether to feel brave or foolish, but the thought of turning back never once crossed his mind. They moved quietly through the yard until they reached the open bay of the main shed. The door creaked in the wind, and inside it smelled of rust and wet wood. Then a voice, rough but familiar, rang out. "Don't take another step." Jack froze. From the shadows at the far end, a tall figure emerged, rifle aimed squarely at them. His parka was dark shearling, his boots caked with ice, and his breath came out in white clouds. Luke Carter looked older than Jack remembered, though he was only 5 years his senior. His hazel eyes, once warm, had gone cold and sleepless. The stubble on his jaw had turned mostly gray, and deep lines carved down his face like riverbeds. He held the gun steady, but the tremor in his hands betrayed him. "Luke," Jack said quietly, "you shouldn't be here." "I could say the same," Luke replied, voice brittle as thin ice. "You're trespassing on private property." "Private property?" Jack's tone cut sharper. "This is Mercer's yard, and you're standing guard for him?" Luke's jaw clenched. "You don't understand. It's not that simple." "It never is," Jack said. "But that didn't stop you from helping him, did it?" The air between them burned colder. Eli stood frozen behind his father, watching two men who shared the same blood but different burdens. Ranger's hackles rose. His growl rumbled low in warning. Pike lifted his sidearm slightly, eyes darting between the brothers. "Jack," he said under his breath. "He's shaking." Jack took a careful step forward. "You remember what Dad used to say?" His voice softened. "The Carters don't protect wrong even when it wears our name." The words landed like a stone breaking glass. Luke's arm wavered. The rifle dipped. He let out a sound between a laugh and a sob, raw and small. "You think I wanted this?" he said. "Mercer had everything, contracts, money, judges in his pocket. He told me if I didn't move the timber, he'd bury me and everyone on my payroll. I thought I could buy time, fix it quietly. Then people started disappearing." His shoulders sagged. "I didn't know how to stop it." Jack's eyes softened but didn't lose their edge. "Then help me stop it now." For a moment, Luke looked at him, snow blowing between them like ghosts. Then slowly, he lowered the gun and dropped it into the snow. "There's a vault," he said hoarsely. "Under the mill. Mercer keeps everything there. Ledgers, payments, false customs forms. I can get you in." He led them through the shed to a trapdoor hidden beneath a warped tarp. The lock was already broken, Jack's doing from the night before, and the air that rose from below was bitter and metallic. They descended into the concrete bunker, their lights cutting through the dark. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with boxes, flash drives, and paper ledgers. It was the heart of Mercer's empire. Daniel Pike started photographing everything, his movements quick, methodical. "This is enough to bury him twice over," he muttered. Mara searched the shelves, pulling documents marked with Canadian seals. Eli hovered near Ranger at the stairwell, the dog's ears twitching. Then, a noise, a crunch of boots above. Jack looked up sharply. "We're not alone." Before he could speak again, the trapdoor exploded open. 3 men in black parkas dropped through, rifles raised, faces hidden behind ski masks. The air filled with shouting and gunfire. Jack shoved Eli to the floor, returning fire as splinters rained down. Ranger lunged, teeth flashing, tackling one of the attackers by the arm. The man screamed as the dog clamped down, thrashing in the snow. Pike fired twice, another man collapsing against the wall. Mara dragged Eli behind a steel crate, pressing him down. In the chaos, a small metallic drive flew from one of the crates, skidding across the floor. Ranger's eyes locked on it. The old dog released his hold and leapt, teeth catching the flash drive just as a bullet shattered the concrete near his paws. Jack's shout echoed, "Ranger, back!" But before anything else could happen, voices thundered above. "Federal agents, drop your weapons!" Spotlights cut through the open trapdoor as a squad of federal officers swarmed in. The masked men froze. The fight was over. Smoke and snow mingled in the light. Jack turned to his brother. Luke was on his knees, clutching his arm where a bullet had grazed him. His breath came ragged, his eyes wet. "I told you," he whispered. "I didn't know how to stop it." Jack knelt beside him, hand firm on his shoulder. "You just did." A month later, the snow in Denver had given way to slush and sunlight. The courthouse loomed like a mountain of stone, its steps wet from melting frost. Inside, the air was heavy with finality. Grant Mercer sat at the defendant's table, his dark suit crisp, his face unreadable. The years of arrogance that had built empires now looked thin beneath the cold light of justice. When the verdict came, life without parole. He didn't flinch. Only his eyes moved, flicking once toward the back of the courtroom where Jack Carter stood beside Luke. Luke's arm was in a sling, his features pale but calmer than they'd been in years. The lines of guilt around his eyes had softened, replaced by something quieter. Acceptance. When the judge's gavel fell, he lowered his head and exhaled. He had promised cooperation in exchange for a chance to make things right. For the first time in decades, that promise felt real. Across the aisle, Mara Ellison and Daniel Pike sat in their formal uniforms, crisp blues gleaming under the lights. The ribbons on their chests shone, restored with the honor they'd nearly died for. Mara's red hair caught the sunlight through the high window, and for a fleeting second she smiled, a tired, grateful smile that seemed to close one chapter and open another. Pike, jaw tight as ever, allowed himself a nod toward Jack. It was his way of saying thank you, of acknowledging that justice had finally turned its face their way. Outside the courthouse, the wind smelled of thawed earth and the faint sweetness of pine. A small ceremony took place on the steps. Local officials, reporters, and the Silver Creek rescue team gathered to honor bravery in the storm. When Eli stepped forward, the borrowed ranger hat slipped slightly over his brow. He grinned shyly as the metal ribbon brushed his chest. Ranger stood beside him, fur glinting gold in the sunlight, tail wagging once, slow and dignified. Cameras clicked. The old dog looked up at Eli, then at Jack, as if to say his work was done. Weeks later, the forest awoke again. Snowmelt carved streams through the valleys, and the air was thick with the smell of pine and new life. Jack, Luke, and Eli stood on the ridge overlooking Silver Creek. Luke's sling was gone, though his arm still bore the scar. The brothers said little. Words had become unnecessary. Below them, the forest stretched wide and alive, free again. Jack's voice broke the quiet. "No one gets buried here anymore." Eli nodded, eyes following a hawk circling above the tree line. Ranger sat between them, eyes amber in the sunlight, his fur rippling in the wind. The world was thawing, forgiving. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Then Eli reached down, resting his hand on Ranger's back. The old dog leaned into the touch, steady as the mountain itself. In that silence, something shifted. A kind of peace that didn't need music or miracles, only loyalty, love, and the courage to believe that goodness, like spring, always returns. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't come wrapped in thunder or light. They come quietly, in the loyalty of an old dog, the courage of a small boy, or the moment a hardened heart chooses to forgive. Out there in Silver Creek, beneath melting snow and whispering pines, a family was rebuilt, a wrong was made right, and faith, the kind that lives between man and beast, was born again. Maybe that's what God does best. He doesn't always calm the storm. Sometimes he walks with us through it. He sends a guiding hand, a loyal friend, a small spark of courage in the coldest night, to remind us that no soul, human or animal, is ever truly forgotten. So if you're watching this tonight, wherever you are, hold on to that spark. Believe that grace still walks among us, in the quiet moments, in the snow, in the eyes of those who stay by our side when the world turns cold. If this story touched your heart, share it. Someone out there might need a reminder that goodness still breathes beneath the weight of winter. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what miracle you're praying for. And if you believe, as we do, that God still works through love, courage, and loyalty, hit subscribe, join our little family of believers, and may the Lord bless you and keep you safe through every storm. Because somewhere out there, another miracle is waiting to be found.